Everybody's freaking out about Marathon right now. Is it good? Is it bad? Nobody knows. Nobody can figure it out. Nobody can decide. And I don't think Bungie's even figured it out. But the story seemed kind of interesting. But I don't know anything about it. I just know the way it looks. And it seems kind of interesting with, like, pictures of themselves as a child and things like that. I don't know. The way it sounds seems really cool. So we're going to dive into the story of Marathon 2025 Explained.
Marathon 2025 is a pretty polarizing step forward for the Marathon franchise. It's been dormant.
Is it? Is it really? They're gonna have to prove it to me.
Since before I was born, and its revival isn't exactly what a lot of people are going to be expecting. Marathon was a pioneer of early FPS storytelling, and yes, while its new form is radically—
Didn't it used to delete people's hard drives? Isn't that the whole reason why Microsoft even bought Bungie? I think I heard that like yesterday on another video.
different, it will share a roughly similar style of exploration-based storytelling. So today, we're going to go over everything that we know so far about the lore and story of Marathon 2025, starting out with the events that lead up to it. So, New Marathon is set in the year 2893, but—
That's a long time, bro. That is a real long time. Interesting. Not very many sci-fi games go quite that big a leap into the future. Even Halo didn't go that far, isn't it? Set in like the 2200s or something?
to understand its story, we first have to go back hundreds of years. By the 25th century, humanity in the Marathon universe had become a fledgling multi-planetary species with an established colony on Mars.
I think we're gonna reach that a lot sooner, if we don't blow ourselves up first. I could see like maybe 2100 we could start doing that.
This was a large colony, however, and to sustain it, 5 gigantic and rather ingenious cargo ships called Crisps were created, to ferry large amounts of materials and resources from Earth to Mars. For a time, these ships proved successful, and the population of Mars boomed as a result, but it wasn't long before the cracks began to show. Of the 5 Crisps created, 4 of them lasted for 100 years before needing any maintenance, and the other one only 73. Given their size and complexity, maintenance was a lengthy procedure. Refitting just one Crisp took upwards of 15 years and consumed the entirety of Earth's spaceports in the process. It was simply unsustainable, and so, after 2310, no more of these ships were built. This decision, alongside their constant failures, devastated the Mars colony, who were now faced with extreme resource shortages whilst also—
It really sounds like Borderlands. It sounds very similar to Borderlands. Maybe not as crazy as Borderlands, but Borderlands craziness is kind of interesting. Way more interesting than this is so far. With like the Atlas Corporation and how the corporations took over everything and then they kind of crumbled because they were unsustainable and had power shifts all the time based on murder and guns.
Being severely overpopulated. As each successive Crisp failed, famine ran rampant, and by the 25th century, living conditions on Mars had dropped by as much as 80%. The Mars colonists were suffering and dying by the day, and what came next was nothing more than an extreme galactic kick in the teeth. In 2408, the United Earth Space Council came to Mars and decided to take its moon, Deimos, and convert it into a colony ship to be sent deep into the stars to colonize the Tau Ceti system. This ship was the UESC Marathon, and its target was the planet of Tau Ceti 4. This justifiably enraged the already suffering Martians, who believed that Deimos should have instead been turned into a new Crisp that would potentially have saved them, although the UESC—
Yeah, that's usually about how it goes. The thing that everybody wants or needs to survive ends up not becoming real because money, power, and just bad decisions all around.
admitted that they'd never even considered this as an option. They were dead set on creating the Marathon to reach Tau Ceti, and that's precisely what they did. Upon its completion in 2472,
Your colony is broken. We're just gonna go over here and make a new one. Y'all just continue doing your thing. Whatever happens, happens. It's on you. It's exactly what corporations think. And governments.
the Marathon left the Sol system with its sails set on Tau Ceti. which it reached some 300 years later in 2773. When it arrived in the system, it quickly set up a colony on the planet of Tau Ceti 4, which
You know, that was a long time. That means that there were generations on that ship, if I'm getting the timeline right. It jumped from like 2500 to 2700, yeah? So like 200 years? I don't know, I'm not following too well. There's not much to it, but it's just like boring space stuff that any generic space game would have as a backstory. Something I could come up with is better than that. Their own game, Destiny, is better than that.
operated peacefully and efficiently for 21 years, until its devastation in 2794 at the hand of the Four, an alien race of slavers who essentially act as Marathon's Covenant.
They're like the Covenant mixed with the Guardians from Halo 4.
With the colony utterly obliterated, the Four turned their attention to the ship that was hanging in orbit, the Marathon. And this is where you step in the original Marathon.
I wish Bungie would just make a Halo game. Not like Halo, but a game that was like Halo. Just a new IP with all new stuff and just really show up the Halo franchise.
You played as the last of the 10 battle droids, basically Marathon Spartans, who were sent aboard the ship to Tau Ceti, where, among many things, you hold off the Four assault on the ship before being kidnapped and taken by one of the ship's AIs, Durandal, to the distant homeworld of the Svet.
It's really just too bad that they're making this an online extraction shooter, because if this was a first-person shooter story-based game, like Halo, I think this would be killing it. This would be killer, because this sounds really cool.
Lawan. And it's 99 years after these events at the end of the first game, where Marathon 2025 takes place in 2893. Now, for reference, Marathon 2 only takes place in 2811, so not too long after Marathon 1, and, well, Marathon 3 doesn't really count because it's set in 7 alternate timelines at the same time. So, regardless, Marathon 2025 is quite a considerable jump forward in the Marathon timeline, but don't worry, there's a reason for that. So, during Marathon 1, you and the Marathon's command AI, Leela, re-engage the ship's satellite dish and successfully transmit a message back to Earth to warn them about the Four and what's happened at the colony. But the caveat is that that message would take roughly 92 years to arrive, and in 2893, it appears that it did just that. When civilians found out about the message's contents, panic very quickly ensued on Earth, but it remained a complete mystery as to what actually happened to the colonists. But regardless, corporations and clandestine organizations alike saw opportunity for profit.
Of course they did. That's always how it goes. Typical corporations, am I right? I mean, I get it, yeah, it's true that this happens, but it also happens in a lot of futuristic, post-apocalyptic sci-fi games. That it's just like, did they just borrow it from Borderlands? And Halo, it's like they mixed Halo and Borderlands, but then they were like, well, we can't do Destiny again. Extraction shooter, that's gonna be popular. Feel like they're just kind of cashing in on a trend and they didn't try very hard.
On the long-lost colony of Tau Ceti 4. And so, they began mobilizing to seek out its riches. Given the harsh conditions on its surface though, mere humans were incapable of going down to the colony. But that's where a corporation called Sakaguchi Genetics came in. So Sakaguchi were pioneers of artificial intelligence, cloning, and biomatter technology. Using this highly curated skill set, they created the runner shells that we play as in New Marathon. Mechanical vessels implanted with digitized minds that are resistant to the harsh conditions of Tau Ceti.
That sounds really cool. That's a really cool concept, and it looks really cool. I'll give them that one. There's just like some cool stuff thrown in every once in a while, here and there. But is it going to be enough to hold this story up? Because right now, to me, it seems kind of boring and kind of generic and kind of same as every other sci-fi shooter. But less interesting. But then you throw in some stuff like that and I'm like, yeah?
And that allow humans to venture down to the surface without risking their own lives. But the way they do so does require some degree of sacrifice. You see, humans looking to become runners must have their brains digitized, which Sakaguchi facilitates using their advanced AI technology, and it's these digitized minds that control the runners. This is also why when we die on Tau Ceti, we can simply be reborn again, even as a different runner, because Sakaguchi's patented Weaver worms can...
It still kind of feels like Borderlands, but they're taking the charm away from it and trying to make like a Death Stranding type deal mixed with Cyberpunk. Because like in Borderlands, you have the Digistruct, where when you die, you just kind of reconstruct at a Digistruct point. It's very, very similar concept, but they're taking it seriously in this.
Just simply print us another shell. Those with an eye for profit come to Tau Ceti 4 to plunder its long-lost riches and ancient mysteries, of which the UESCs still also have a vested interest in. Patrolling the surface are hordes of UESC combat drones, guarding their long-lost colony for reasons unknown. Perhaps the UESC are after more within the planet than they originally knew was there. Or perhaps they wish to cover up the realities of what happened there all those years ago. In Marathon
I want to know what was happening with that explosion. Why did that person explode like that?
2025, it's our goal as runners to work with and also against the various corporations and entities who have a newfound interest in Tau Ceti 4, to find riches and also to uncover the mysteries of this long-lost colony. So, a quick bit of lore to get out of the way before we get into the deeper stuff are the runners. So, right now, we know very little about the runner shells besides their names and some of their previous specializations. First off, Locus is an ex-UESC Spec Ops shell, hence the clear similarities in its design with the Mjolnir Recon 54 Battle Void armor.
It just I don't like the design. The design is very generic and boring and blocky. I get what they're going for, but it's just not interesting to me.
Glitch is a shell used by...
Right here, this shot right here. I'm interested in this. I like this. A lot of people I hear don't like this character. I think she looks cool. Not all of the time. This version of her, I think looks cool. And the version of her in the cinematic trailer when she's like running through the battlefield and gets shot, that version of her looks cool. I don't like the black-haired version where it looks more like Statue of Liberty.
Martian freedom fighters, so possibly, as we're going to get into later, a shell that's seen extensive use by Mida death squads. And then Blackbird's origin is classified, and Void's origin is unknown. And all of this leads us to the factions that you're going to be in.
Oh, we don't know a backstory to give them, so let's just not give them a backstory and just be like, well, the backstory is this one's classified and this one's unknown. Yeah. There, that's the backstory. Because it's interesting and mysterious. Like Zero from Borderlands 2.
Interacting with in Marathon. These factions fill the role of traders in Tarkov, and they come in the form of various competing corporations and also one ex-political party turned radical terrorist organization. To communicate with them, each faction has an assigned AI agent who delivers you contracts and, in doing so, also delivers the story. We were told quite
There's an awful lot of AI mentioned in this. A lot of AI around the gameplay and stuff in the story. How much of this game is AI generated? Probably most of the character designs. I feel like they're AI generated because they look like basic designs from like mobile games. And that would explain why this game feels like a whole bunch of other games mixed into one. I think this whole game's generated with AI, and it's just an experiment.
Explicitly at Bungie that there are going to be disagreements and conflicts between these various corporate and political entities, because at the end of the day, they all want different things out of Tau Ceti.
I just think it's kind of ironic that a corporation is making a game about corporations being bad and being only about money and leaving people behind, and it's straight up a corporation that does that. I think they've lost the plot. They really have.
And you are their instrument to attain said things. So, Cyber Acme are the first faction that you're going to be interacting with.
It's like Acme from the Looney Tunes, but cyber.
They call themselves the digital backbone of modern life, and are an industry leader in AI functionality. They're also the corporation who
They run everything behind the scenes like Acme. from Looney Tunes. It's just cyber.
To the terminals that we found in the original Marathon games. Their AI representative is none other than Oni, whose Cyber Acme have integrated into every runner shell to assist you on the surface.
Of course, Oni. That's why I always get the game Oni confused with Bungie, because I always think it's a Bungie game. It's actually a Rockstar game. Or maybe I'm confused now. Am I crazy? I think I'm going crazy.
Of Tau Ceti 4. Oni acts as your personal AI, giving you tactical information on the battlefield. New Caloric is the corporation who supplied the colonists on Tau Ceti with much of their sustenance. Their primary directive is to ensure long-term human survival by optimizing the production and distribution of essential consumer goods, whilst also mitigating species-level risks. And their AI assistant is called Gaius. Traxxas Offworld Industries is an entity that has existed in Marathon's universe, at least in some capacity, since 1994. They stand at the forefront of innovation across all major industrial categories, from mining to space exploration and communications. And funnily enough, this is all entirely new lore for Marathon 2025 that just so happens to be perfectly in line with the lore that Bungie created for Traxxas in the Halo universe.
Yeah, because they can't come up with original ideas anymore. The whole game's AI generated, and then they also took ideas that they used to use for other things and just transformed it into something else. That's all I did. Trend chasing. Like, what made these other games great? We're gonna put it in this game. Make it great. That's how it works, right?
Coincidence? I think not. Many years ago, however, Traxxas suffered some extreme brand damage thanks to one of their AIs, Traxxas 4.
I understand that this came out before Halo, but Marathon, the new one, is not one of the old Marathon games. They're just taking some stuff from it and taking the lore and adding on to it, because it's something they already did. They don't have to come up with something new, even though they kind of did try to come up with something new by mashing a bunch of things that already exist together.
In 2206, Traxxas 4 fell into rampancy on Mars and infiltrated 5 other AIs on the Martian net. The only recourse was for Mars to entirely shut down its version of the internet, but even still, it took 2 whole years to root out all the damage that Traxxas 4 had caused, and the repercussions of this event were still felt upwards of 10 years later. Until the actions of Durandal, and I guess Tycho as well, Traxxas 4 stood as the most infamous example of the dangers of rampancy in AIs. Thankfully though, the Traxxas AI assistant who helps the runners on Tau Ceti is yet to go rampant. This AI agent is called Vulcan. Sekiguchi Genetics are the faction at the forefront of everything modern Marathon. They have their hands in robotics, cloning, AI development, cryogenics, but more importantly are the creators of the weave worms that create the runner shells, while also specializing in the transfer of the human mind into other forms.
Why didn't they just make a story-based game? They really should have just made another Halo. Because this is really cool. It looks really cool. It seems like it would be... They probably were gonna make a story-driven single-player game. And they were like, you know what? That doesn't continuously make us money.
Those forms being the shells. After all, Sekiguchi are literally the reason that we are able to become runners and go down to the surface of Tau Ceti. Arachne are the one faction that right now we know nothing about. They seem to be kind of a later game faction because in all my time playing Marathon, neither myself nor anybody that I've spoken to was ever able to unlock them, and Bungie also purposely told us literally nothing about them at all whilst we're at the studio, which makes me think that they might be something quite clandestine. But then, there's Mida. Mida are the faction that we know the most about right now because they had a pretty strong presence in original Marathon. So we don't know exactly what Mida stands for, but we do know that for a time it was a political party on Mars who staunchly opposed the UESC and the United Earth government. So in Halo terms, Mida are pretty much the insurrection. They were a pretty popular political party on Mars until their coup in 2321.
They're just... They should have come up with something new. Because this new Marathon game, the lore looks like Halo lore, and people are just gonna compare it to it and be like, well, Halo was the predecessor and it's way better. So why are you going back to this lore? Why didn't you just make new lore? I don't know, man. Am I the only one who feels this way? Like they're just taking a bunch of things that already exist and mashing it together, and like they're getting people to say this is the next big thing. I'm just not seeing it.
Where they usurped the UEG and took control of government. Mida ruled Mars for just 3 cruel, ruthless months, during which their death squads patrolled the planet, slaughtering anybody believed to be loyal to the UEG. An estimated 10% of Mars's population were believed to have been slaughtered in this endeavour. A rule this violent doesn't typically last for long though, as was the case with Mida. Their short-sightedness got the better of them. They underestimated the overwhelming military superiority of the UEG, and for some reason never once considered hijacking the near-impervious marathon ship that was being constructed in their planet's orbit. It seemed as though they were simply acting out of a violent urge for revenge against their masters.
You know, it wouldn't even be that difficult to make this marathon game like a Halo game, now that I'm thinking about it, because they could literally just put in like 8 missions, 8 story-based missions that are just single-player co-op. You run through the missions, get a little bit of story as you're doing it, and it would play just like Halo, but with 2025 mechanics, a new game style, like new art style, which they need to fix, make it cel-shaded or something, make it look like Borderlands if you're gonna make it similar to Borderlands. But yeah, just do that. Everybody be happy. 8 story-based co-op, single-player style missions that are not online against people, and just run through. They don't even have to be that good story-wise if it's just a fun thing to do. Totally doable.
And so, their rule was quite easily dismantled by the UEG. After their coup was over, their leaders were executed for their crimes, and Mida as a political organization was banned in all forms, forcing it to go underground, where it shed all semblance of a political party and quickly morphed into a full-blown radical terrorist organization, with its sights dead set on the UEG and the UESC. Despite being unequivocally underground, Mida receives extensive funding and harbours some of the most excellent minds in the Sol system, such as one Bernard Strauss, of whom we're going to come to in a minute. 20 years after their coup, in 2345, a massacre occurred that only strengthened Mida's support, known as the Mizraya Massacre. Yes, Mizria or Mizraya is a thing in Marathon as well. During the extreme famines on Mars, which were caused by the breakdown of the crisps, a riot broke out at a UEG food distribution center. UEG forces were informed that the rioters were armed, and so they opened fire on them.
You know, sounds like a good idea, everybody. Remember our game from the 90s that we ripped off with Halo? Well, let's take that back, so now it feels like we're ripping off Halo. But with the game from the 90s, it's not really a rip-off, because we did that first.
Incinerating over 500 Martian civilians in under 5 seconds with plasma fire. But it later turned out that only 3 of those Martians had weapons. The rest were simply trying to flee from the carnage. But by this point, semantics meant nothing. This event sparked the outbreak of the Third Martian War, which lasted for 3 long years and only furthered the legitimacy of Mida and its radicals. So, Mida may have been too short-sighted to seize control of the Marathon during their rule of Mars, but that doesn't mean that they didn't have any plans for it. In fact, it's highly likely that Bernard Strauss, who was the creator of the Battleroid, so essentially the Dr. Horsey of Marathon, was a Mida plant aboard the ship, and that by extension, the character that you play as in the Marathon games, the Mjolnir Recon 54 Battleroid, was also a Mida plant. Strauss unfortunately died, likely when the Four attacked the ship, so we don't know for sure what he and Mida's plans were with the ship, but it's safe to assume that it was a plan that was centered around revenge against the UESC, and that it involved the colony that they were trying to establish on Tau Ceti 4.
This sounds really, really cool for lore for the 90s. Because there wasn't a lot of deep lore for stuff in the 90s. I mean, there were for things not near as many as today. But now, going with that same lore that they already used for Halo, I feel like they're collecting member berries here.
Enter Marathon 2025, specifically its ARG. In this ARG, which is very clearly set at the same time as the new Marathon, you play the role of a Mida agent trying to ascertain what the hell happened on Tau Ceti. You do so by hacking into UESC terminals and reorienting Traxxas satellites in orbit of the planet, which ultimately resulted in the reveal trailer, which, I guess contextually in-universe, can be seen as a glimpse into the carnage that occurred on the surface of the Lost Colony. For all intents and purposes, this is the first time that anyone outside of the UESC or the involved corporations have had an insight into Tau Ceti 4 since the 4 attack, and I imagine the state of the colony is rather eye-opening to Mida. So, much like the other corporations, they too act as a faction that the runners can side with and complete contracts for, but it's likely that they're going to be the dark horse among them. Where all the other factions seem to be sending runners down to Tau Ceti for...
All the factions, I'm not seeing a difference in any of them. They all kind of do the same thing. So they have like different personalities, sort of, but there's not enough different about them that I can tell them apart. Seems kind of complicated for me to just jump into an extraction shooter with this kind of lore.
Mostly profit, I think that Mida's reasoning is going to be far deeper. The UESC still have a presence on the world, which we're going to come to in a second, and so I think it's fair to assume that, yeah, among also seeking profits and the other secrets buried within the colony, Mida are going to be...
It seems like these characters in this new version of Marathon could be in any of these factions. They don't look like any certain faction, and they're not showing anybody else that are in these factions, so it's really hard to tell.
Wanting to use this as an opportunity to lash out against the UESC in whatever way they can. And speaking of the UESC, their presence on Tau Ceti 4 is a strong one. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the UESC in Marathon are essentially a combination of the UNSC and the UEG from Halo. They were the ones who built the Marathon to...
You don't say. Another thing that's like a thing from Halo.
Travel to Tau Ceti 4 and colonize it in the first place. And despite the colony itself being wiped out by the 4, the UESC have maintained a constant ground presence via their drones that patrol the ruins and engage any hostiles.
There's so many things that's like Halo in this that I think they should have just made a Halo competitor. This sounds way more interesting than what modern Halo has going on. Oh, we're gonna throw you into this whole open world game so you can save this guy and his family. It's your only goal here. You'll fight this Covenant rebel group in the meantime that's on this planet. Why not? Just get thrown in the middle of that.
At least to my knowledge, they aren't a faction that you can align with in the game, which to me implies that they stand in opposition to all the corporations and entities that are coming to Tau Ceti 4 to plunder the planet. More than likely, this is because the colony hides secrets that the UESC don't want to get out. And on the topic of the UESC, let's talk about AIs. Specifically, the one AI from OG Marathon that I think is rearing his head once more. Durandal. Durandal was in control of the automated doors on the Marathon, but his role in the story very quickly outgrew something so menial. He goes rampant and has his own motivations, including defeating Tycho, the third Marathon AI, defeating the 4, but most importantly, his main goal was to escape the inevitable collapse of the universe. Durandal is undoubtedly the main character of Marathon, and he was even the reason that the 4 found Tau Ceti. He alerted them to humanity's presence at the colony simply so that he could bring them there and steal one of their FTL-capable ships and use it to explore the galaxy. His story in the original Marathon ends with him merging...
It sounds really cool. I like this whole Durandal thing so far. How are they going to incorporate it into an extraction shooter? And why? I'm still like perplexed, kerfuffled, as to why they're making this an extraction shooter and not just like a single player / co-op action shooter with like a light story. They could have totally done that. And they could have made it very, like, kind of small. Like a classic Halo game. It would have done amazing. Charge $30 for it. People would eat that shit up. Even $40.
his consciousness with an ancient AI called Thoth, of whom was created by an ancient race known as the Yarrow, literally just Marathon's foreigners. He roamed the galaxy for tens of thousands of years, and even at one point returned to Earth to remind humanity of his existence, and also to confirm that the Four were nothing but a distant memory. However, in those years that he was roaming the galaxy after the end of Marathon 2, it seems as though Durandal might have returned to Tau Ceti 4, or at least established contact with what remained of the colony that his ship was sent to start. And FYI, this next bit is speculation and not hard canon. So in the reveal trailer, there's this strong, cryptic male voice that, based on the effects placed on it, sounds very—
Okay, speculation aside, before we get into the speculation parts, what do I think about Marathon's story so far? I really like the 90s lore. The 90s lore is really cool. But, since they already did it with Halo, and this game does not look as cool or sound as cool as Halo, as in the new Marathon, why? Why are they making an extraction shooter? It literally only so they can make money. They don't care about making a good game. They just want to make it good enough to make profits. And they threw in a whole bunch of ideas from other things, probably AI generated, like what mechanics should I put in my game? What kind of game should it be? Oh, extraction shooter with some Borderlands style game mechanics. And we'll use old lore from Marathon, make it look kind of like Death Stranding. And then they AI generated the backdrops, I bet, and then just kind of threw in the blocky stuff. Because they were like, well, we need some areas like this, and it's not too good at making it. So, let's just make this part ourselves, and it looks very off.
very clearly like an AI.
Death. The end of all things. But the dream is not over. My dream. Yours. Now. Run.
Now, not only does he seem to refer to our dreams as his, but in what little dialogue he has, he seems infatuated with the concept of death and the end of all things.
Kind of like Ghost in the Shell, where once you're connected into the system, they got you. I forget what the AI is called in Ghost in the Shell. That's in like everybody.
Just as Durandal was in Marathons 1 and 2. I am convinced that that voice is Durandal. What he's saying lines up perfectly with his existing character, his obsession with the concept of death and his delusions of grandeur. And then, at least anecdotally speaking, his cadence and tone sound exactly like what I always envisioned Durandal would sound like. Why Durandal would return to Tau Ceti is anyone's guess, but given that 10,000 years after Marathon 2, he returned to Earth to, and I quote, assure that Earth did not forget him, he's obviously one to return to the sites of his victories, to gloat and bask in his delusions of grandeur. And I mean, where better is there to do that than the site of his first victory, the Marathon? And I mean, hell, the tagline of this game, "Escape will make me God," is literally a Durandal quote. There is a...
That is pretty cool. I like that a lot. That's a cool quote. This whole concept with Durandal sounds really cool. Still, why extraction shooter?
0% chance that he's not going to show up at some point. I am adamant. As for the other two AIs of the Marathon, Leela, the command AI, was captured by a species called the Violae and ended the trilogy by infesting their computer networks, and Tycho was entirely destroyed by Durandal. I strongly doubt that either of those...
I can kind of understand where the gameplay and the story could make sense, but the only way that I can make it make sense in my head is if you're replaying areas in the story over and over and over again. And the story is that you just need more loot. I'm thinking that that's what the story is going to be, pretty much. It's going to be the main meat of the game with the story connection. And there might be like some background story stuff here and there that's like nods to lore. But I don't see any actual real story coming about, except they might attach some cutscene to a new area or to a new game mechanic or characters. I can see how they can do it that way, but actually having story-based gameplay where story is happening during the gameplay without it repeating over and over again, I don't see that happening.
They're gonna show up, but Durandal to me is almost guaranteed. As for the four, the only presence they have right now is what appears to be the Lookers, those exploding bugs from Marathon 1, who are returning as the Ticks. Now, Bungie haven't confirmed that these two species are the same, they haven't confirmed that the Ticks are the Lookers, but I don't know, I just feel like their stark similarities are way more than just a coincidence. It seems like there's some weird parasite or infection or something that's infested some of the UESC facilities that spawned these ticks as well. The areas that they show up in are kind of overcome with this really, like, sickly, fleshy detailing.
Like the Flood from Halo? Why not just make a fucking Halo game?
I don't really have any footage of it, sadly, but I feel like this is going to be relevant to the story at some point. So, moving on, we have easily the most iconic, not even enemies, just entities within the Marathon universe, the Svet Compilers. So, the Svet were once the servants of the Yarrow, who possessed incredible terraforming abilities. They were able to convert barren desert wastelands into marshes, oceans, rivers, and forests with great ease. Native to the world of Lawan,
watching all of this Marathon classic gameplay makes me want to play Marathon, because I've never actually played Marathon, I just heard about it over the years. I might check it out. Leave down in the comments if I should check this game out. The old one, not the new one. I'll probably check out the new one, maybe. I still haven't decided. I don't think I am.
That we visit in Marathon 2, they were released from their servitude when the Yarrow departed the galaxy, and then split into 11 different clans, each ruled by elders. But when the Four arrived at Lawan, however, a war broke out, of which the Svet unfortunately lost, which led to their enslavement. They were forced to fight alongside the Four as Svet Compilers, but after the cyborg that controlled them was destroyed by us at the end of Marathon 1, their shackles were broken, and they fought alongside us against their former masters. In Marathon 2025, however, it appears that hostile Svet Compilers still roam the corridors of the desolate UESC Marathon. Their purpose? Unknown.
Of course it's unknown. Everything's unknown in this. They're gonna roll out the story slowly. In cutscenes. Or like, go here, find the voice memo so you can get some backstory to a thing that has nothing to do with what you're doing right now. Kind of like Borderlands. I could see them doing that. Which, once again, multiplayer extraction shooter. 3 versus 3 versus 3 versus 3 versus 3. I don't know. I don't know about it, man.
And speaking of the weird unknown, the map Diamarsh is essentially cut in two by this really strange ethereal anomaly that's manipulating gravity and space on Tau Ceti.
That sounds interesting. I like that. I like the way that sounds. Gravity-based gameplay in a multiplayer game? I could see that being cool.
Best of our knowledge, such immense power was never held by the Four, but it was held by another, much more grandiose species, the Yarrow. The Yarrow's technological capabilities vastly outweigh any other species in the Marathon universe, with their most notable creation being the Trizeme, a weapon of unimaginable and rather mysterious power that was used to force a star into an early supernova. The inner workings of the Trizeme are entirely a mystery, but it stands as proof of the Yarrow's abilities to manipulate
Another mystery. Another mystery. Unknown.
the concepts of space and time. So, jumping forward to the new Marathon, not only is there the Diamarsh anomaly, but also in the cinematic, we see a mysterious human visitor to Tau Ceti in 2827, which is 33 years after the colony's destruction. We see him walk through a very similar looking mirage with...
Is it just me, or does this guy's outfit just look like he's wearing street clothes, and it's not like an actual worker uniform? He looks like he's kind of, he looks like he could be a character from the Miles Morales Spider-Man universe.
A wrecked floating UESC truck to the side, only to begin uncontrollably floating himself before his head implodes. So based on the existing lore, it already kind of looks like this anomaly entity could be Yarrow in origin, But funnily enough, there's a very cool Easter egg in Marathon 1 that might just confirm it. So just for the record, the Yarrow are never mentioned once in the lore of Marathon 1. They were introduced in Bungie's predecessor to Marathon, Pathways into Darkness, but they didn't exist in Marathon lore until they were reintroduced in the terminals of Marathon 2. However, if you load the third level of Marathon 1, Never Burn Money, in Forge, its level editor, you'll see a secret message off to the side outside of the level geometry that reads, Yarrow were at Tau Ceti. So, is this anomaly confirmation of that 31-year-old Easter egg? Well, it sure as hell looks like it might be. And if it is, then how the Yarrow will play into this new story, well, I am very intrigued to find out.
Okay, the story's cool, the lore is cool, but I guess that's pretty much the 90s lore and the 90s story, because it hasn't been around since the 90s. How is the new story going to connect to the gameplay, and is it even going to be any good? Because they're going to have to top their old story, which I don't think that they can do. They'll have to do better than Halo, which I guess is a spiritual successor to the story and lore from Marathon. Good luck. Good luck being the spiritual successor to a spiritual successor.
And so that covers the story of Marathon 2025 so far, with of course a little bit of speculation thrown in there as well. I'm going to be covering all of Marathon's story and lore in great detail leading up to and following the game's release, alongside of course my usual Halo content. So if you're new around here, then make sure you drop a sub down below. So with that said...
So I guess Mint Blitz is going to be trying to get a little bit away from Halo because Halo's failing. He's probably going to try and latch on to anything that's just somewhat like Halo. But I don't know about it, man. I think he's throwing a shot in the dark. Throwing a shot in the dark. Shooting a shot in the dark. I don't know. Shot in the dark with this whole Marathon thing. I don't think it's going to be good. I think it's going to be good, but not... It's going to be like Destiny 2, probably. Or even worse, Destiny 1. It's not going to go well. It's not going to be smooth. The rollout for features not going to be smooth. They're going to charge out the ass for everything. We'll see. We'll see. If you want a t-shirt or something, I make the designs myself down there in the description. Check it out. I'm out.